Good morning, Glenmore. It's really good to have this view again. Y'all look just as handsome and beautiful as the last time I saw you from this angle. It's my joy to be with you again today. For those of you that don't know me, my family and I were members here for 7 great years. And you may claim me, and that's good because I already claim you. Once you're a pastor, your church membership goes to the annual conference because they don't want the pastor to play favorites at all, and that's the way it works when you're a pastor. But I always tell people I know exactly where my home church is, and I tell them it's on New Cut Road. You are my home church because my family and I, we grew more spiritually here than any other church we've ever been in. And so if I do anything good in my ministry, you can take partial credit. And if I mess up, that's going to be all on me, okay? This is the place where I started seminary classes and where our daughter was baptized. And at this place, Pastor Andy allowed me to preach a lot. My first sermon was not here, but my second sermon was. How's that? So sermon 2 to maybe sermon 200, you had to endure. And so I'm very grateful for that. And so when Pastor Matt invited me to come back to preach while he was on sabbatical, I was really honored and I was glad to do it. And he was asking me over lunch. And he waited till I said yes, and we'd signed the contracts, and I'd passed the security clearance, and the blood tests came back okay. And then he said, oh, by the way, I'm calling it the summer of great preaching. Thanks a lot for that. No pressure. And so I went to my husband and I said, I'm a little nervous. I feel like they remember me as being a better preacher than I actually am in the flesh. So my husband of 20 years, I wanted him to say, don't worry, baby, you are that good. He said, don't worry, baby, that church has grown a lot since you left. And a lot of those people won't even know who you are.
Positive reinforcement.
Hey. Now, I chose this passage not because it's my favorite necessarily. A lot of pastors don't really have a favorite passage for preaching. But when I prayed about it and I got into the scriptures, I really felt led to preach on this particular passage to you today. One of the things that I like about it is it starts off like such an ordinary day. I can really relate to what's going on here. We have a woman going out in the heat of the day for water like she always did, day in and day out. I picture her before her, she's gathering up her things for her day. Let's see, bucket for water, check. Keys, where did I put my keys? Cell phone, power bar, check, check, check. An ordinary day. Other women went in the early morning or in the cool of the evening for water, but she went out in the blazing heat of the day to avoid the whispering and the accusing stares, perhaps. Jews didn't talk with Samaritans, and she had a questionable reputation. So midday was her time to draw water, and there never was a day when she didn't need to do it. So she went every day, her and her bucket. She knew who she was, all right. She was kind of a bucket person, fallible and flawed. Maybe once upon a time she had fountain potential. But time and tide and wrong choices and good intentions had left her with 5 husbands. Maybe in my mind, 4 kids, a mortgage, and a leaky bucket. She knew her life story well enough. Indeed, the whole town knew it. Into her life on this random noonday came a man who strangely did not seem too concerned about buckets. He didn't even have a bucket. And he kept talking to her about fountains. Living water, he said, the kind that bubbles and flows like a river. He said he had fountains of living water, the kind that wouldn't just quench her thirst for today, but would quench the gnawing underneath her thirst. When he looked at her, he saw her, really saw her. He told her everything she'd ever done, sure, but not like the gossips at the well seemed to. He could see her past, and he could see beyond it, too. It was like he knew who she really was. In the humdrum world of buckets and wells and work and loneliness, sometimes we need to be reminded who we really are. If you happen to be a parent, you're doing this already because you know a lot of your job is to remind your children for them to remember who they are. Remember who you are. We say it in several forms. When you're in kindergarten, remembering who you are is as simple as literally remembering your first name and how to spell it, maybe in block letters. When you go to middle school, remembering who you are means something else again. Locker combinations, changing classes, becoming a teenager. We're kind of going through that at our house. When you get to high school, it means something else again. It means remembering who you are behind the wheel of a car or when you're out with your friends. Each stage of life seems to have its own bucket, some bigger, some smaller, some rough, some plain. And in the midst of it, we need reminding that there's a fountain in a wilderness place, and there is someone else, God, that tells us who we are, apart from pop culture and peer pressure. Buckets can be hard to give up. I like a good bucket, particularly with fried chicken in it. It's always nice. They're handy. They fit nicely into my back seat, my garage, my garden. I think as I have grown older, it's been a little harder to let those buckets go, and I get better at patching the cracks and holes in mine, you know. When you get to be grown up and middle-aged folks and empty nesters and retirees, we all need to be reminded who we are. I have a friend that's a really involved mom, and her last child just went off to college, and it's thrown her into this major tailspin. She feels like she's losing her mind. She called me up. She said, I don't know what to do with myself. Should I get dressed? Should I brush my teeth? She says. Yes and yes, says I. But her Facebook postings are filled with alarm. She says, I don't know what to do. I don't know who I am. I've done my job so well. They don't need me anymore. And I don't say a word because my children are still at home. So I know she would say, just you wait, Henry Higgins. I mean, it hasn't happened to you yet. But I watch the wisdom pour in on Facebook, and they say, wait, give yourself some time. Stay connected to your friends and to your church. You're still you. You're still a great mom. Remember who you are. We need to be reminded who we really are when we lose our minds and sin and miss the mark. We need to be reminded that we can always repent and we are forgiven. We can get up and get back on the right path. Like the prodigal son in the far-off country, we come to ourselves. We remember who we are and we turn toward home and we find that we are beloved daughters and sons. And before we can get the I'm sorry out of our mouth, our Father meets us on the road and calls us children, reminding us who we are. Many of us may not have the Samaritan woman's exact story, but I suspect we know a little bit about how she feels. We know a little bit about what it is to be caught up in the life story that other people give us, the life story we write for ourselves, the one about not being good enough, the one about business as usual. It's easy to forget God's story for who we are. You know, the prophet Jeremiah tells of a time when Israel developed amnesia about who they were and what God had done for them. And God says through Jeremiah, my people have committed two sins. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living water. Ding, ding, ding. Lest you think it was just a New Testament thing. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living water, and they have made cisterns for themselves. Buckets. They have made buckets for themselves, broken ones that can hold no water. They turned away from the fountain in favor of their leaky bucket. I totally understand that completely, by the way. If you've ever been around a big fountain or a big geyser, it can get a little unruly and scary. If Jesus were to ask me, which Jesus doesn't often do, I would say, Jesus, I don't know about this living water. I think it's better to tame the fountain and be able to control it because, if it gets out of hand, it's going to get my clothes wet. What will we do then? I would rather have less water and be able to control it and have power over it. The fountain of living water scares me a little. It might make some demands on me. It might mean that I can't be in control anymore. If I were the woman at the well, I'm ashamed to say it, but I think that I would tell Jesus, I would like just a little Dasani water. Maybe some with some strawberry flavoring, no calories, some vitamin water. Put some vitamins in there. And I would like it to be portable and cost less than $2. And I want it to fit in my cup holder in my car. I want the fountain of living water, but on my own terms. That's Niagara Falls. That's scary. I don't want any part of that. I understand when people turn away from the fountain of living water. But here's the thing. When you forget you're a fountain person, you pay a price. Fountain people would have remembered that God created them and made covenant to be their sovereign God. Fountain people are tuned in to God's extravagant love. Fountain people sing Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound, because for them, grace is amazing. It's huge and overflowing. Fountain people, because they drink of God's living water, are always on the lookout for where God's living water is on the move next. They look at their neighborhood and they say, where is God's living water moving in my neighborhood? Where is the Lord? Is the Lord in the hospital? Then we need to be in the hospital. Is the Lord's living water flowing through some classroom somewhere? Then we need to be in the classroom. Is it in the prison? Then we need to be in the prison. People who realize who they are as fountain people have an abundance mentality. They don't care about collecting the water because they know it can't be collected or stored anyway. They remember that story about Israel in the wilderness, and they were hungry, and God provided this food called manna, which in my mind tastes like Brunswick stew or grits or something delicious like that. But God provided manna, and when they tried to collect and store it, it went bad. Because God wanted to show the people that God would be their provider. People who know they are fountain people don't care about collecting the water. They're all about sharing it. Look at what God has given us. Look how many blessings God has poured into us. How can we use these blessings to bless someone else? By contrast, people with a bucket point of view tend to look inward. They circle the wagons. They tend not to share because they think they will never have enough. They're not about sharing God's overflowing water of grace. They're about counting the drops in their own little buckets. Bucket people compete with each other. Whose bucket is bigger, more durable, more full? People with a bucket mentality don't ask what God is up to in the neighborhood. They want to keep God in their own little bucket, their own little box of their own making. We're tempted to trade the fountain for a bucket when things get easy and roads look free and clear, and also when things get hard, when we get in panic mode. But bucket living is like being on a hamster wheel and having us run in circles, and it just leaves us frustrated and thirsty. The bucket point of view is perhaps best illustrated by an old children's song about a bucket with a hole in it. It's an exchange between a husband and a nagging wife, Henry and Liza. If you're under 40, you'll have no idea what I'm talking about. So I'll bring you up to speed. Here's the problem. Henry realizes there's a hole in the bucket. So he mentions it to his wife, who of course has all the solutions and the answers. Isn't that right, honey? So it gets worse. They got a hole in the bucket. So the husband says, with what shall I fill the hole? And Liza suggests a stick, which turns out to be too long. So she helpfully says to cut it with a hatchet. And when the hatchet is too dull, she helpfully tells him to sharpen it. And he says, like, how do I sharpen it? And she goes on a stone, which of course is too dry. So she says, well, get some water to wet the stone. And then he says, with what shall I fetch it? The water? And I could feel Liza's whole body, her being, her rolling of her eyes as she says, with a bucket, Henry. And Henry says, but there's a hole in the bucket. And see, they're right back where they were. It's a hamster wheel, a lot of effort to no avail. And it's almost like God is saying to the Samaritan woman, and maybe to us today, when you're done with your bucket, text me. And you can come to the living water. You can come to the fountain. When you're done with your leaky bucket, come to me, and I will give you living water. Beloved church, you know all about these fountains of living water. Your sign out front may say something really innocuous and harmless looking, like your worship times, or maybe something about Walk to Bethlehem, or a marriage seminar, or a Bible study group. But beneath the sign, it's really about a fountain of mercy and love and new possibilities in Jesus Christ. It's a fountain of hope and joy and peace. That's what you're offering. It's an uncontrollable, life-giving fountain. And I get it. I'm a Methodist. Many times we want our Jesus by intinction, a little bit at a time. But when you're dealing with living water, there's no keeping that bottled up. When justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream, things can get out of hand. But people, that's where the fun is. That's what the kingdom of God is all about. And that's who you are as fountain people. How do I know? Because I have worshiped here. How do I know? Because in 2003, I wasn't really looking for a fountain church. I wasn't. I had small kids. I wanted a nice bucket church, preferably a big bucket church with lots of children's programs and activities and ministries. And you had that in spades. And I was really just beginning the fight against my call to ministry. And I thought, I'll go to that big church over there because I can be anonymous. God's going to leave me alone in there because I'm going to get lost among all the other sheep in the flock. And then I came here, and before too long, I started meeting Jesus everywhere I went here. I had encounters with the living Christ in your worship, in your Bible studies, in your missions projects, in your committee meetings. Jesus was everywhere. I came here looking for a place to fill my little bucket, and I found a fountain of living water. That fountain of living water that is Jesus Christ and this church are two reasons that I had the courage to quit my perfectly good job as a lawyer and go to seminary. When I played in the fountain that is Jesus Christ, that's what it did for me. I can't wait to see what playing in the fountain is going to do for you. If you came to worship today with a leaky bucket, heavy, full of guilt about the past or fear about the future or uncertainty about whether God really will provide, let me assure you that bucket's too heavy to carry. Drop it. Leave it here. And come play in the fountain. A fountain full of living water for a thirsty world. There's no bucket big enough to hold it, but there's enough for everyone. Thanks be to God.